Okay, so I've got two people I can see watching. I'm just going to start reading some stuff and going through understanding how our adult choices were defined by our childhood, and often we don't really review what's been implanted in us. So what it means is that we live our lives out, and it's not the way we really want to live. And I found myself it probably took me to about the age of 45 to realize that the life I was living was not my life, that it'd been based on trauma and conditioning. And bit by bit, I began to, my life began to fall to pieces, and then I began to sort myself out and really have made some really good choices for myself now. So a lot of people have been through trauma and who have complex PTSD. It means that we basically have something called arrested development. And arrested development is where there's been abuse in childhood and we've grown up and we've never questioned, where our actions, how our lives play out. We sort of don't understand that the pain has caused us to act in particular ways which can be damaging to us and means that we don't live our lives fully. So one of the books, and you'll find it below, is the Complex PTSD from Surviving to Thriving, which is really important. It's a guide to healing your trauma. And from when I got this book in 2017, it's taken me, 2 years really to get back in full throttle, being myself and being sort of active in the world in the way I want to be. It's been a real long journey, but that book was worth it. There was a lot of grieving that took place, a lot of tears as well. There's got to be healthy grieving and healthy blame, and understanding what's going on. And if we don't know we won't know what's going on just by seeing a therapist. We need to have the knowledge and understand it at a deeper level. And the childhood trauma is very, destructive to us, and most of us don't get to live the lives we want. So the next book that I bought that I haven't read yet is called Trauma and Recovery by Judith Herman. And I'm going to be reading this book over the next month and see what I get out of that to pass on in information. So our adult choices, if we don't grieve, then we basically will stay stuck. If we don't grieve and we disassociate by using, either codependent relationships, alcohol, drugs, shopping, overeating, instead of grieving, if we turn to things outside ourselves to fix us, we're not going to heal properly. So we need to start looking at how we disassociate. Some disassociation is normal. I do quite a bit of disassociation using Facebook, for instance, but when I am using it or social media, I'm doing something productive as well. So I keep an eye on myself. Grief, which is really important part of healing. Grief is a multifaceted response to loss, and particularly to the loss of someone or something that has died, to which a bond or affection was formed. So for a lot of people that have been through child abuse, be it sexual trauma, violence, or emotional trauma, or spiritual, it means that we basically had very bonds that were really unhealthy, often with parents or carers or whoever it was. And it means that we've got behavior that is destructive to us as adults because we weren't able to stand up for ourselves or walk away. Clearly, as children, we've just had to put up with certain things. And the psychological trauma is damage to the mind that occurs as a result of distressing events. And it's the trauma, the C-PTSD kicks in because we haven't got the ability to cope. So what happens is we keep getting triggered as adults because we've not been able to rectify the part of us, like the part of the soul that was shattered as children. And disassociation, I'm reading from my list here. Disassociation is one way the mind copes with too much stress, such as during a traumatic event. So a lot of children that have been through abuse, it would be, as adults now, if we look back, we would have disassociated in order not to feel when we were small. And, we would have done that in a myriad of different ways. And disassociation is also where we feel disconnected in some way from the world around us or self. I wrote something on my Facebook page yesterday, which I'm going to read. And this is what I wrote. So it says, on the matter of early abuse, so we need to integrate our understanding as adults. We need to see the true personality of the people that abused us, be it parents or other, and we need to remove the idea that they had or have any power over us and see that they were weak and unconscious. We have to begin, if we can begin to see that the people that were abusive, they weren't conscious, because when people are highly conscious, they don't, project, and they don't abuse. The more conscious we become, the less projection is going on. And it's really important for us to know that. And also, clearly, as adults, we do project onto other people. We have needs, and if our needs are not met, then we do project onto other people naturally of what needs we want to be met. But the healthier we get, the less projection goes on. And if parents were not conscious, clearly, then it means that a lot of their needs, or their misery that they were creating for themselves would have been projected onto us. So often we can think that we did something as children that made people abuse, but that's not possible. It's like, a child cannot make another person abuse them. Clearly, we know that. So then I said on my post that I posted, so this idea of seeing people being, our parents being as weak or unconscious, or not just parents, but anybody that was abusing us as children, it means that we need to not look at the, we need to look at the lack of nurture that was going on. And this isn't about forgiveness. This isn't about saying, oh, I forgive them, because until we've grieved, we're not going to, there's no light switch for forgiveness. So it's really important we understand that forgiveness is not the main thing we need to achieve. The main thing is that we get to grieving, and then we get to healthy blame, because then we'll be able to start making healthy life choices. Healing from such deep wounds is progressive, so it's not overnight. And I think a lot of people that go on the healing journey think, they might turn to spirituality. I did it myself, thinking that there's going to be a quick fix out there. There isn't. It's a progressive journey, and it's step by step. And sometimes it's 2 steps forward and 1 step back. And we can also try and switch off our feelings, and we need to feel what we're feeling fully. So if we're really feeling sad about something, we need to be able to feel that. And if we're feeling fearful, it's really feel that fear, and then we begin to overcome it. So also, I would say having one other person at least that's healthy enough to be able to hear you verbally ventilate. And verbal ventilation doesn't mean raising your voice. It just means sitting down with somebody and having the conversation about what happened and being heard. And that if you've got tears, they don't tell you to stop crying and get over it and just forgive, because that is not the way through complex PTSD. What else do I have here? So healing from such deep wounds is progressive. With new information and reparenting our own inner child, we can get to be free of the guilt and shame imposed on us by society. Those who have not suffered abuse often hand out information that is not in alignment with those of us that have suffered greatly. Any religious or spiritual beliefs or dogma that bypass true harm done are belief systems and need not be followed. Like, we don't have to follow, if you've got religious beliefs or spiritual beliefs, you don't have to hammer yourself for not being able to do what those spiritual or religious beliefs tell you that you should do. It's healing and beliefs are, they're 2 different things. So if you are into spiritual work, don't hammer yourself into forgiveness. What I found myself, that the more work we do on ourselves and the more grieving that takes place, eventually we come to a place of feeling the pain is not so painful, and then we find there's nothing to forgive. And that doesn't mean hanging out with people either. That just means we come to a sense and a place of peace in our own hearts. The shaming and guilting of those harmed and will come to an end, you know, in society. And it starts with each of us taking on board that we've got to be the leaders in this. So if you are suffering, then, you know that as we empower ourselves and we share knowledge, as I'm doing now, sharing this knowledge, that as we empower others, that we're going to feel more empowered in ourselves, and that we will stop the cyclical suffering. A book I came across, this is another book, I go through a lot of books, something I was looking at, I've got a book called on my Audible, Amazon Audible, and it's called Emotional Intelligence by a gentleman called Daniel Goleman. And it talks about how emotional intelligence is more important than the intelligence of IQ. And I think a lot of people that have been through abuse their emotional intelligence has been somewhat damaged. So due to arrested development. So it's not damaged as such, but we have to reparent ourselves and begin to, you know, look after ourselves as we would a child, like give that nurturing and love to develop. In the book, it does explain that there's a part of the brain called the amygdala, which is a part of our limbic system. And this deals with emotions such as fear and distress. Its main purpose is to alert you to danger, and it sends an emergency signal. And all these psychological responses you have are basically the body's response to the emergency signal. That's what people experience when they experience fear. So flashbacks are where we go back into fear. And below this video, you'll find 13 steps for managing flashbacks. And the more you understand what's going on, the less flashbacks you're going to have as well. So you'll stop, you know, and when you get triggered, you won't be triggered for a whole day or a whole week, as I've been in the past. What will happen is you'll get triggered, you'll understand what's going on, and the trigger might last a couple of hours, as an example. So what else do I have? So he says in this book that it's about neural hijackings, and the amygdala is telling you that there's an emergency and your brain just can't function. So it's like your brain will shut down. And again, that's part of, it's part of the fight, flight, freeze, fawn, which Pete Walker talks about in his book, Complex PTSD from Surviving to Thriving. And I'm going to read here some signs of recovering and what Pete Walker talks about, which is really important to understand so that we can gauge our own recovery through healing from complex PTSD. So Pete Walker says, what are the signs that I'm recovering? And he says, effective recovery work leads to an ongoing gradual reduction of emotional flashbacks. Over time, we become more and more proficient at managing them and alleviating unnecessary states of activation. This in turn results in flashbacks occurring less often, less enduringly, and less intensely. Another key sign of recovering is that the critic begins to shrink and lose its dominance over the psyche. As it shrinks, the user-friendly ego has room to grow and to develop the kind of mindfulness that more readily recognizes when the critic has taken over, which in turn allows us to more readily disidentify from the fight flight against its perfectionism and drasticizing process. So the more we heal, the less we'll begin to drasticize about bad things happening to us and living in a fearful world. And we'll lose the idea of being perfect, you know, the idea that we've got to be perfect. That often comes from childhood as well. If there's been abuse, it means that you know, as a child, we've often probably felt that because there was something wrong with us and we weren't good enough or perfect enough, that's the reason we were abused, and that's a load of bulls. So we need to understand deeply what's going on with C-PTSD. He says another sign of recovering occurs as a gradual increase in our ability to relax, to resist overreacting from a triggered position. So it does mean that the triggers, the more you see them, the less you're going to be triggered, and you'll see it come in, and then you'll just, you know, be able to pull yourself out of being in fight, flight, freeze, fawn mode. And the list is below, so you can check that out. So he says, then from an inappropriate fight, flight, freeze or fawn response. He says, see my article. You can check out his webpage. Again, the details will be below. And on trauma typology. Moreover, there is an increase in our ability to use our fight, flight, freeze and fawn instincts in healthy and non-destructive ways, so that we only fight back when under real attack, only flee when odds are insurmountable, and only freeze when we need to go into acute observer mode. So the fight, flight, freeze, fawn response is a natural response which, you know, it can be used in a healthy way. You know, if you saw, you know, silly thing to say, but like if you saw like a dinosaur coming, you'd run, for instance. And we're not going to see dinosaurs, but give you an idea. So, you know, the fight, the fleeing, you know, if something bad's happening, being able to flee really quickly. So when we've got complex PTSD, having you know, these fight, flight, freeze, fawn responses, they're not all bad. So we need to see that as well. Then he says that another way of describing this is that we have a good balance between the polar opposites of fight and flight. We can facilitate between healthily being asserting our own needs. And that's the other thing, we begin to assert ourselves in a healthy way the more we heal. And, you know, we'll move away from codependency. That's the other brilliant thing that, you know, doing this work, that, you know, we get to have healthier lives and we become more centered in ourselves, and we stop seeking outside ourselves for a fix, you know, be it a relationship or whatever else we do in order to feel safe in the world. Then he goes on to say, so we can facilitate healthily between asserting our own needs and compromisingly acquiescing to the needs of others. Moreover, we can balance the polar opposites of fight, flight, freeze, which in their moderate manifestations look like a balance between doing and being, between sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system arousal, between left and right brain processing. So we don't get stuck in one place and we begin to blossom and flower and things begin to change for us. He says advanced recovery correlates with letting go of the salvation fantasy that we will never have another flashback. So there can be a salvation fantasy when we begin healing or begin using spirituality, that we're going to, or a modality, that it's going to completely cure all of our problems. And dealing with C-PTSD does not work that way. It's a process. It's like, you know, it would be similar to looking after a baby or a child. You know, it's going to have different needs throughout the day. Some days it's going to be, you know, a bit tearful and maybe grumpy, and then other days it's going to be really happy and bubbly and, you know, good stuff going on. So we need to start really looking at ourselves and nurturing ourselves as well. So we want to get away from the idea that we're never going to not have another flashback, and moving into an attitude of accepting the inevitability of, you know, that flashbacks are going to happen sometimes, so that when we lose the salvation fantasy, we're not going to be shocked when one comes up. We're going to go, here goes, I'm having a flashback, and we're going to deal with it really quickly. And this attitude then allows us to easily recognize and quickly respond to them from a position of self-compassion, self-soothing, and self-protection. And I think that's it. I'm going to leave it there for today. I've been on for nearly 20 minutes, and I've got more stuff to read in the next coming up few days. So if you've got any questions, you can visit me over on my Facebook page. I've got a group for ladies, so you can go over there and check me out over there. The link's below. And any questions, I'm happy to receive emails or messenger on Facebook as well. Thanks for watching. Catch you later.